darkness is not an affirmative force. It simply reoccupies the space vacated by the light.
This is the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio
and Urban Family Talk.
It should be uncomfortable for a believer to live as a hypocrite.
Delivering people out of the bondage of mainstream media
and the philosophies of this world.
God has called you and me to be his ambassadors, even in this dark moment. Let's not miss our moment.
And now, the Hamilton Corner.
Good evening. Welcome to the Hamilton Corner here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. I'm your host, Abraham Hamilton III, and it is a pleasure to be with you this evening. Most of you are making your way from your part-time jobs to your full-time jobs, having the weekend in clear sight, clear focus. And as you're doing that, I just want to remind you, man, that it is a blessing, a privilege, and an honor to be a part of a family. But in addition to all of those things, those three things, that there is an ordained assignment for us in our families. And so I want to encourage you to serve your families well, to make sure that we are not offering up our families on the altar of sacrifice as we move forward for external means of faithfulness, but that we grasp this appropriately and understand that our call is not only to be faithful outside of our homes, but to be faithful inside of our homes. And I believe very strongly if the Lord could garrison us, to regather us to focus on evangelizing and making disciples and cultivating and washing our wives with the water of the word and creating an altar for his presence, a sanctuary, for his presence in our families, that is a mechanism where we literally can see the world and our nation changed. And so I want to offer the encouragement that I do on a daily basis to serve our families well, to approach the discharge of faithfulness to our Lord within the context of faithfulness to our families with the same attention and commitment and investment that we would expect and even demand from pastors in our local congregations. You know, the individual families really are local or are the most localized units of the Lord's church. And that when we gather with the saints to worship in our corporate gatherings, it really is a gathering of churches. And so that is my encouragement, to make sure that we're serving, loving, cherishing, and cultivating our families well, that they are not secondary. We don't offer our families the leftovers from a busy work day, but that we prioritize them in understanding the distinctions between Cain and Abel. They both made offerings. But one offering carried a heart that was acceptable to the Lord. Let our offerings to the Lord through our families be acceptable to him as we offer him the best, the first, the choice portions of ourselves to our families. Amen. Well, we will begin the show as we do on a daily basis by turning to the Word of God. And today we're going to turn to the Hebrew Scriptures book, the Old Testament book of Hadassah. The title in English is Esther. And most of you know, just like the three Hebrew boys, I refer to them by their Hebrew names, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, because it was the penchant of conquering kings. And when they conquer opposing nations and make them a part of their empire, they seek to uproot the culture of the nation that they had conquered. And so they would give, for example, Jewish people who were now made a part of this Persian empire, which was inherited, if you will, from the Babylonian conquest. It's amazing. Just as the Lord prophesied it through Daniel, it happened. Where you had the Babylonian Empire was a national superpower. Then they would be succeeded by the Medo-Persian Empire, which is where we are right now, because under King Ahasuerus is the Persian king, which was the successor to Babylon. Following the Medo-Persian, you have the Persians, and then you have the Greeks, then you have the Romans. Just like Daniel prophesied. Isn't that interesting? But getting back to this, Hadassah, her parents were living in the Persian Empire. They died, and she ended up being cared for by her cousin, Mordecai. The Persians gave Hadassah a Persian name called Esther, and that was the name that she was given as she became the queen of the Persian Empire. There's so much in that. But as we talk about the Lord's account in the book of Esther, many of times, and I've done this as well, we preach and focus so much on what Esther did and her declaration of if I perish, I perish, following Haman's scheme to eradicate the Jews within the Persian Empire, which was all the Jews in the world at the time. The Bible tells us that the Persian Empire spanned with 127 provinces from Ethiopia to India. So you're talking about Africa, and in this Old Testament reference to Ethiopia, it wasn't the modern day geographical boundaries of Ethiopia. You're talking about pretty much almost half, if at a minimum half of the African continent being under the Persian Empire and spanning from there all the way to India. This is a massive, massive empire. And in that empire, the Jews were one of the conquered nations that were a part of the Persian Empire. Well, Haman, the Bible tells us explicitly that Haman was an Agagite. Now, why would the Bible tell us this? I tell you all the time that there are no superfluous details included in Scripture, but the Lord does include these details for our edification, for our learning, for our growth, for our sanctification. Why would the Lord tell us that Haman was an Agagite? And Haman the Agagite is the one who connived to get King Ahasuerus to agree to a plot to exterminate all the Jews. I mean, a lot of people think the final solution was something that was original and exclusive to Hitler, when history will teach us, including biblical history, that there have been many plots to annihilate the Jews. And Haman is a predecessor, if you will, to Adolf Hitler, although Haman was unsuccessful in his endeavors. But the Bible tells us Haman was an Agagite because Haman is a descendant of King Agag. Well, who was King Agag? King Agag was an Amalekite. An Amalekite. You remember when the Israelites first made the Exodus? Who was the first enemy foe that descended to try to wipe out the Jews early on in their Exodus? It was the Amalekites. We get from that attempt to attack the Jews the story where Moses had to keep his hands up to win the battle against Amalek. When his hands fell, they were losing, and when his hands were erect, they were winning. And so Aaron and Hur got the stone for him to sit on, and they both stood on each side of him, holding up his hands. Well, that was a battle against Amalek. Haman was an Amalekite. So you see this tension that Haman has, this hatred toward the Jews Haman would have, because if you remember going forward, remember when the Lord told Saul to deal with the Amalekites, and he said, I did. And then Samuel shows up and says, what is this bleeding that I hear in my ears? Oh, well, you know, I really wanted to keep the best stuff. And the Bible tells us that Samuel ended up dealing with King Agag. So you have Haman, as a descendant of Agag, has this tension and this hatred toward the Jews that is not only temporal, but he has an ancestral hatred for the Jews, which resulted in him getting King Ahasuerus to be willing to exterminate the Jews. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit. Haman has this plot. He strings up gallows for Mordecai. Haman's plot is revealed. Haman is revealed as one who sought to not only kill all the Jews, but also King Ahasuerus' wife. And then deliverance is afforded to the Jews. But sometimes I think we may misunderstand this deliverance. So we're going to pick up in Esther chapter 8. I'm going to read verses 7 through 14. Try to read these quickly, because I realized I talked a whole lot just now. Verses 7 through 14, and I want to make a couple comments. Here we go. Verse 7, then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows, because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. But you may write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring, for an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. The king's scribes were summoned at that time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day. And an edict was written according to all that Mordecai commanded concerning the Jews, to the satraps and the governors and the officials of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to each province in its own script and to each people in its own language, and also to the Jews in their script and their language. And he wrote, Mordecai that is, he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's signet ring. Then he sent the letters by mounted couriers riding on swift horses that were used in the king's service, bred from the royal stud, saying that the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy and to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, and to plunder their goods. On one day throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, a copy of what was written was to be issued as a decree in every province, being publicly displayed to all peoples, and the Jews were to be ready on that day to take vengeance on their enemies. So the couriers, mounted on their swift horses that were used in the king's service, rode out hurriedly, urged by the king's command, and the decree was issued in the Susa of Citadel. Now, what's going on here? Haman's decree was initially issued on the 1st month of the year, and the decree was in the 12th month, on the 13th day of the 12th month, all the Jews will be annihilated. So that was sent out. Okay, they didn't have email, you didn't have FedEx, you didn't have United States Postal Service, all this kind of stuff. So it took a while for these edicts to circulate the entire expanse of the Persian Empire. So when Haman's plot is revealed, all of these things happen. King Ahasuerus gave Mordecai the privilege of writing a countervailing decree in the 3rd month of the year. Now, the annihilation date was in the 12th month of the year. So in the 3rd month, the decree that was sent out all across the Persian Empire was to allow the Jews to defend themselves. Very often when we think about deliverance coming to the Jews through Esther's intervention and Esther's intercession, we kind of think of it like it's a made-for-TV movie, like it's a Hollywood script, and happily ever after the Jews lived in the Persian Empire. No, brothers and sisters, that was not how it happened. The reality is, because you have to understand, it takes a while for these decrees to filter through the entire expanse of the Persian Empire. So the king knew, and Mordecai knew, there would be some people who, because of their own hatred for the Jews, because Haman as an Agagite was one of the people who had been willing to carry out the execution of the Jews. But because of other people in the Persian Empire's hatred for the Jews, the king knew, and Mordecai knew, and more importantly, God knew, that there would be some people who would say, oh, I didn't know there was a second decree issued by the king. All we knew was that at the 12th month, we're supposed to chop off all the heads of the Jews and to plunder their goods. So the king sends this second decree out, written by Mordecai, that says, well, you know what, Jews? You have the right to fight now. Under the first decree, you had to submit and be arrested and be annihilated. But now you can fight back. The salvation, the refuge, the salvaging that was done for the Jews in the book of Esther was a salvaging or a provision of God that allowed them to fight back. Now, why am I sharing this? Man, the Lord has been stirring my heart, showing me that God's divine providence on behalf of his people is not always. There are times when the divine providence is like Joshua in the battle of Jericho, and they march around the city's walls and the walls come tumbling down. But even though the walls fell, they still had to fight. When Caleb, in his 80 years, at 40 years, 40 years old, he was willing to take the promised land. And at 80 years, he still hadn't had his mountain. And he said, and 80 years old, I'm as strong today as I was when I was 40. Give me my mountain. Well, you know what that was? The giving to him of that mountain was an opportunity for Caleb to ascend into the mountain and to expel giants. It was the provision to fight. When the Israelites took the promised land, it wasn't as if you had this, a gift left on the porch. It was an opportunity to fight. And what I'm saying to you, that I believe in this moment that we find ourselves in, with the darkness mounting all around us, things happening in our families, things happening with our loved ones, things happening in various marriages, the Lord's grace for you is a grace to fight. Don't give up on your children. You have a wayward teenager, don't give up on him. You're having difficulty in your marriage, don't give up on him. The deliverance for the Jews through Esther's intervention and Mordecai's intervention was a deliverance that empowered them to fight. You read the remainder of the book of Esther, you see, even in the Susa Citadel, where Mordecai had now become the king's right-hand man, there was 500 people who tried to kill Jews, and the Jews defended themselves. And in the rest of the empire, 75,000 people were trying to kill Jews, and they defended themselves. This laid the foundation for the Jewish holiday of Purim, because they're celebrating the fact that God gave them the grace and empowered them to fight. And what I'm saying to you, that as we're praying, we're crying out to the Lord, don't just think that the Lord isn't answering your prayers because things aren't happening magically. The Lord is answering by giving you the grace and the empowerment to fight. Don't give up on your marriage. Don't give up on your families. Don't give up on your children. Let us fight.
Shining light into the darkness. This is the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the Hamilton Corner here in American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. I've been trying to get to this case all week and hadn't been able to get to it, but I want to bring to your attention something that I will be watching out for, and I encourage you to do the same. There is a case that has made its way to the Supreme Court, and it is styled, let me give this case style, American Legion versus the American Humanist Association. Now, what's going on here, the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments next week, Wednesday, February 27th, on a lawsuit concerning a cross-shaped memorial in Maryland. It's called the Bladensburg Cross. The Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial is in the shape of a cross. and it's also on public property. So because of this, the American Humanist Association has filed a lawsuit saying that the existence of a cross, even though the cross was erected in 1925. Now, we're in 2019. The lawsuit was filed, I believe, in 2017. But the cross has been on public property since 1925. The American Humanist Association has filed a lawsuit saying that the memorials having the shape of a cross, the memorial having the shape of the cross, is a violation of the Establishment Clause of the U.S. Constitution. Of course, you all know, you listen to this program, the Establishment Clause says Congress shall not let me read it exactly, because I don't want to, the Constitution here. Let me read it exactly. Oh, turn too fast. Here we go. It's in the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. It says this, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Okay? So the American Humanist Society has said that because the memorial is in the shape of the cross, it's a violation of the First Amendment. Now, I'm reading the amendment. It says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Okay. I don't see how they're doing that here. But regardless, the American Humanist Society has filed this lawsuit. Now, I'm a little giddy over this lawsuit. I have to tell you. And I'll tell you why. Because, one, I know several of the litigators who are arguing in favor of the Bladensburg cross personally. And I know a little bit about their litigation strategy and their argument strategy. And they have great arguments to smack down once and for all this corruption of the understanding of the Establishment Clause and the attendant jurisprudence that's followed from it. There is no way the Establishment Clause in the Constitution, in the First Amendment, was created to prohibit the United States federal government from establishing a national religion. The founders, in fleeing the tyranny of England, came to the new land, the new world, declared independence from England, and the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which, if you understand anything about the history of our Constitution, after the original articles of the Constitution were drafted, some of the people who participated in the drafting said, we're not signing that. Because it seems to be too much power afforded to the national government, what we now refer to as the federal government, and not enough protection of individual rights. And so the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, was promulgated and circulated throughout the country and was necessary in order for the Constitution to ultimately be adopted and ratified by the states. Among those amendments, the first freedom mentioned is Congress shall not enact, read it again, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Because in England, whatever religion the king or queen was, that was the religion of all of her subjects, which the whole concept of citizenry is a revolutionary thought. You know, and I may get to this, I may do it in this segment now, because I think we, considering the advance that socialism is making in our country, we need to revisit our founding principles. And I think I'll do that a little bit to share the conversation that I'm having with myself on this issue. But getting back to this particular case, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. This cross isn't saying that, well, the United States government is now requiring every citizen in the country to be, Presbyterian or Episcopalian or whatever. That is what the First Amendment was erected to create, what was erected to prohibit. Not a World War II memorial where you have Gold Star mothers who want to honor their sons who died fighting in World War I with a cross. Not in the least bit. So Attorney Jeremy Dice, for example, from the First Liberty Institute, who was representing the American Legion, said this: they, the American Humanist Association, want to have the cross, altered, destroyed, or desecrated, none of which are reasonable options, and certainly none of which are required under the Constitution. Unless the government is actively forcing you to believe in some sort of religious belief or act in a religious manner that it condones, the First Amendment is not violated, and he's absolutely right. Now, when you ask, why am I giddy about this? I'm giddy because, considering the makeup of the court, with the additions of Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, hopefully, But all signs so far point to the fact that these arguments will be well received, that this cross is not an erection of establishment of religion, is not a law erecting the establishment of religion. And conversely, consider the implications. If the Supreme Court concludes that the Bladensburg Memorial Cross, which is a big cross on a public property, is a violation of the Establishment Clause, then that means we'll have to start getting bulldozers out for the Arlington National Cemetery. That means we'll have to remove the Canadian Cross of Sacrifice or the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and where the Argonne Cross is there. So you literally are looking at the prospect of having all of these memorials that have been erected to honor our war dead. I mean, imagine that. A mother who lost her son in World War I, who wanted to honor her son with a cross, being told by an American Humanist Society, vis-a-vis the Supreme Court, that she couldn't do it. Not in America. And so I expect this case to come down 5-4 with Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Thomas, Alito, and Roberts all voting together to conclude that this Bladensburg Memorial Cross, as well as other crosses and memorials, do not violate the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And I expect the ruling to go even further to strike a new blow and a new rebalancing of Establishment Clause jurisprudence, because the jurisprudence prior to now was going in the direction to where any expression of Christian faith among the federal government in any, or among governments in any way, shape, form, or fashion, was being met with challenges of unconstitutionality. Well, I expect this case to be a broad shot across the bow, rebalancing that to where we get back to some semblance of sanity concerning the Establishment Clause, and reversing the trend of the jurisprudence on this case. So I am looking forward to seeing the resolution of this case, because I think it'll be a great one for liberty, freedom, and religious liberty in particular. And I think it could add to a fervor in evangelism in people who happen to be government employees. You know, I think it can lead to a new understanding of what it means concerning the separation of church and state. I said many of times that those 8 words have been taken out of context to mean something they have not meant. The Baptist Church in Connecticut sent a letter to Thomas Jefferson asking them about, well, this new government, will we be free to worship the Lord as we see fit, or do we have to fear the national government intruding upon our province as members of the kingdom of God? And Thomas Jefferson wrote back and said, no, you don't have to fear, because a wall of separation has been erected between the church and the state. That wall was meant to keep the government out of the church, not vice versa. Which is, I say all the time, which is why we have to this day paid chaplains on staff that open Congress every day with prayer. That's why we have the announcement of the Oyez, Oyez at the Supreme Court every day that concludes with God save America and God save this honorable court. Because the founders knew better than these regressives that have made their way into the federal judiciary in our day, who have misinterpreted and misapplied the U.S. Constitution. Now, having said that, I want to, and this is something I've just been chewing on myself, because it seems like we've lost our understanding of founding principles. And I've said many times before, one of the tools that has been used in the federal judiciary has been a severance of the Declaration of Independence from the Constitution, when the reality is the Declaration of Independence is the charging statement, if you will. It's the charging statement for why and how and when and why and where there is this nation called the United States of America. The Constitution is the document that implemented the ideals articulated in the Declaration. Okay? Just want to read a little bit of it. You know, right at the beginning of the Declaration of Independence, it says this: when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitles them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind, which requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. You know what I'd like to see? As we're basically getting hot and heavy in this presidential election time, I would like to see reporters and debate moderators for candidates for the presidency in every party to have conversations about the Declaration of Independence. I mean, I can see it this way. Let's say, for example, CNN would invite me. Of course, we know that'll never happen. But let's just dream a little. That CNN would invite me to moderate a debate, for example, in the Democratic presidential primary. Senator Kamala Harris, I'd like to ask you, when the Declaration of Independence says that, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitles them, what do you think the founders were discussing when they referred to the laws of nature and nature's God? Wouldn't you like to see her response? I would. I'm going to go first. I'll tell you why. The next sentence begins this way. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Now, the founders are clearly articulating the purpose of government's existence. Government exists to secure, protect the rights that have been given by their Creator. So the question I'd like to ask you, Senator Harris, is where do you believe rights come from? Wouldn't you like to hear them answer that question? Jeff, wouldn't you like to hear them answer that question? Senator Sanders, Bernie Sanders, where do you believe rights come from, eh? Do you believe rights come from God, or do they come from government, eh? Where do you think they come from? I'd like to ask him. Because, folks, we're in a day where we need to revisit these founding principles, these principles of liberty, because that would completely tell you where these people stand on a host of issues. Senator Warren, Elizabeth Warren, where do you believe rights come from? It's worth an investigation. I mean, when you talk about that men are endowed by their Creator, what implications does that concept have on our understanding of government, on our understanding of our duties to our fellow man? These are conversations we need to have. I want to read this part again. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Isn't it interesting that the founders didn't just say that the government derives its powers from the consent of the governed? It said it derives its just powers. Former Vice President Biden, what do you think are just powers of government? Folks, these are the type of conversations we need to have. Because I think by having these conversations, we would require these candidates, and as a result, require these citizens that are watching these debates to revisit the founding principles of freedom. I was once asked the question, hey, what do you think one of the best sources of founding principles, what would be one of the best sources to teach our children some of the founding principles? I would suggest revisit the Declaration of Independence. Go through it, have conversations. What is a just power of government? What is a just power? And how does this concept of just powers relate to the concept of the consent of the governed? Man, it would be a powerful conversation to have that conversation. And then this is something I'd like to have a conversation about. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, what ends are those? Maybe the self-evident rights that men have been endowed with by their Creator, that governments exist to protect and to secure. Maybe that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Here's a question I like to ask many of these candidates. And I even encourage you to have some of these conversations, around your dinner table with your family members and with your loved ones. Some people say, well, we don't like to discuss politics at holiday times. Forget politics. Discuss founding principles. And let's see whether or not various platforms and ideations line up with these founding principles. And if they don't, what is the basis to reject these founding principles? But here's the question that I have. Because when you read that sentence, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of people to alter or to abolish it and to institute a new government. here's a question I have for, let me see, who else do I want to pick on? Cory Booker, T-Bone, Spartacus T. Cory Booker, let's have this conversation. When you see that the founders believed that whenever government becomes destructive of the ends of freedom, it's the duty of the citizens and is the right of free people to abolish it, how do you think an education that is dominated by the government would empower citizens to do this? Okay, sidebar. This is one of the reasons why I have a healthy aversion to government education. Because if one of our founding principles is that when government is not doing right, then the citizens have a right to choose a new way to be governed, then how well do you think the government would do in educating you to be able to activate that right? It's very simple that the government is supposed to be of the people, by the people, for the people, yet we give them, the government, the responsibility of training our children. Do you think the government has an interest in training your children to be effective and holding them accountable or getting rid of them when they violate? Me don't think so.
The Hamilton Corner podcast and one-minute commentaries are available at afr.net and urbanfamilytalk.com. Back to the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the Hamilton Corner. The point I was making before we went to break is, when you see that the undergirding founding principle that contributed and animated the American Revolution was the idea that when government gets out of line, people have a right and a duty to get rid of it. Now, again, it's just like this. How many of you out there think that Congress people will vote for term limits? That they're going to vote, a majority of the House of Representatives and the United States Senate are going to vote to limit their own terms in Congress, how long they'll be able to serve in Congress? Not very many. Okay, now think about that. Now to expand that concept, the dominant feature of education in our country, starting from in primary education all the way up to higher levels of education, is the government. Do you think the government has an interest in training the hearts and minds of young American citizens to be the most robust and the most effective at holding it accountable? Think about that. Think about that. I remember having a conversation with Dr. Beisner about this when he said, whoever had the idea that given the people who control our government, the American citizens, subjecting them to the will of the government in education, whoever thought that was a good idea, look, if you think that's a good idea, I think I got a couple bridges to somewhere I'd like to sell you. Think about that. Think about that as a fundamental principle. I'm not getting into the vagaries. I know that there are wonderful people who are teachers and public school administrators, things of that nature. But think about it. Do you think that our nation's interests are best served by having the dominant figure where 90+% of the students in America are educated? They're educated by the very government that they're supposed to be holding accountable? Do you think those government educators have a vested interest in making sure that they have the best ability to hold them accountable? Consider it this way. Consider that you have a boss, a business owner, a person who owns a business, and the business owner has to review the employee's performance on an annual or semi-annual basis, right? But that business owner gives the employees the ability to dictate to the owner the standards for those job reviews. Does that make sense? You get what I'm saying? So the owner of the business has to review the performance of the employees, but the employees create the standard for the job performance reviews. How many of you think that the employees will communicate to the owner the type of standards that are necessary that could get the employees fired if they don't do their jobs well? Think about that for a second. None of the employees will sign off on job performance evaluation standards that will result in them getting fired. Now, in my little example, guess who the owners are? The American people. Guess who the employees are? The government. Because the government are public servants. They exist to serve the public. But by giving them the dominant space in educating our children, we are giving the employees the ability to tell the owners the standards by which the employee should be evaluated. I mean, that just makes too much sense. And that's only by just revisiting some of our founding principles. What I am suggesting, and maybe I need to get a petition started. You know, let me ask some questions at these debates. Because these candidates, I guarantee you, unless they listen to this program, these candidates will not be ready to answer any of these questions. I guarantee you would have some of them saying, well, rights come from government. I guarantee you. Moving on. Let me keep going, because I have more things I want to get to. This is sad, man. This is bad news I have to share. Yesterday, Vermont. The House of Representatives in Vermont passed abortion legislation. Now, I'll say this on the front end. This bill has to go to the Senate, and then ultimately has to be signed by the governor. But the Vermont legislature is dominated by a supermajority of Democrats. I mean, this bill passed in the House of Representatives in Vermont by a vote of 106 to 36. You had 90 legislators who signed on as co-sponsors of the bill. I mean, the bill was going to pass no matter what. Well, the bill, and it's H57 in Vermont, the bill is a far more radical expansion of late-term abortion than the legislation that was just passed in New York, where its blood governor and its legislators celebrated. I mean, folks, the masks are off. People are telling you who they really are. What does this bill do? This bill in Vermont allows abortion for any reason whatsoever up to viability. I mean, not up to viability. The Vermont legislation allows for a baby to be murdered at any point of pregnancy for any reason whatsoever. Now, some of you are saying, well, Abe, how is that different from the New York law and even the law that was proposed in Virginia? It's different in this way, because at least in New York, they attempted to act like they didn't want to murder babies for any reason whatsoever. In New York, the law on its face only allowed abortion up to 24 weeks. Then it allowed an exception to that law that included, the Doe v. Bolton all factors test in the cases of health and for the life of the mother. But that was an exception to the law. So the law in its face, it says, well, we only allow abortion up to 24 weeks, when we know for practical purposes, the law allows for abortions for any reason whatsoever. But at least the New Yorkers tried to act like they weren't, ravenous murderers. This Vermont bill, they don't even include any exceptions. They don't even include any attempts to cover their ultimate objective. The Vermont law literally offers a blanket permission slip for any and all abortions throughout pregnancy for any reason whatsoever. Period. That's what the bill says. No exceptions, no qualifications. The bill says for any reason whatsoever. I want to read exactly how it's articulated here. Here's what H57 says specifically. Every individual who becomes pregnant, notice they say individual. You know why? Because they want to get away from only women are the ones who can be pregnant. So they say every individual, you see. Even though it's only women who can be pregnant, but hat tip for them to the transgender, transsexual community. Every individual who becomes pregnant has the fundamental right to choose to carry a pregnancy to term, give birth to a child, or to have an abortion. Period. No exceptions. The bill goes further. Now, this is similar to New York, where it strips unborn children of any rights or any recognition of their personhood by the state. The bill says, quote, a fertilized egg, embryo, or fetus shall not have independent rights under Vermont law, end quote. Talked about this before. In Vermont, a child in the womb has no legal rights, independent of the mother. Even though the DNA is different, even though the blood type is different, even though the heartbeats, vital organs, all that's different, no independent rights. Republicans in the Vermont legislature try to offer amendment after amendment to this bill to change it. They try to offer an amendment that will require a woman to get an ultrasound before aborting the child, before killing the child. The Democrats voted that down. They even offered an amendment. Get this, folks. Now, this might make your stomach turn like it makes mine turn. the Republicans in the Vermont legislature tried to offer an amendment that would require minors to have parental consent before they could have a child aborted. That amendment failed. So you mean to tell me a child who's pregnant can get an abortion without her parents' consent? You can't even get certain medicines without parental consent. But the Vermont legislators felt like the ability to murder children was so sacrosanct that mommy and daddy can't even be bothered to be notified? You tell me how this is not a haven for sexual predators. You tell me how. A sexual predator impregnates a child, that child ends up going to get an abortion, and the parents don't even have to be notified? Not in Vermont. Folks, this is sick. This is sick. This is sick. And medical professionals will tell you there is no legitimate health reason for a child who has been gestating for 36 weeks, 40 weeks, to be murdered for the life of the mother. When the children, when the babies get that big, you're not even keeping the mom from delivering the baby. When the babies get that old, and I'm saying it this way because for me, I'm referring to them as children. You know, we oftentimes talk about the birth age of children, and it's we calculate their age post-delivery. But I'm changing that in my own life, in my own family, my own interactions. Because the children, when they're born, they've already been here 40 weeks. When they're born, they've already been here 40 weeks. So the 1 year birthday, the first birthday is closer. You're almost at your first birthday when you're born. Well, not birthday. You're first celebrating your arrival, if you will. Folks, this is sick. This is sick. And the masks are off. The masks are off. This whole idea, this is even beyond, we're far beyond Roe versus Wade. Roe only allow for first trimester abortions. I don't think people even realize that. That's all, I don't say that's all. That's what Roe versus Wade allowed. First trimester. We're way beyond that. These folks are ravenous. And when they have so elevated the God of sexual pleasure that they're willing to even kill for it. Folks, we need repentance. Because when you start targeting the babies, you're putting yourself crossways with God. The Lord Jesus says, suffer the little children to come unto me and do not hinder them. Do not hinder them. Whoever causes these little ones of mine to stumble, you get in crossways with God when you start taking aim at the babies. Like this. We're in a bad way, folks. We're in a bad way. I want to share one more story before I get off the air. And this is along the lines of what I began the show with, fighting back. That we don't have to take this stuff lying down. You know, deliverance from the Lord comes sometimes in the form of giving us the grace and the ability to fight back. I'm going to share a story with you of a 79-year-old woman from Commerce, Georgia, who was in her house at noon, 12 noon, broad daylight, and some thugs tried to break into her house. But in her own words, you come here if you want. I got something for you. Jeff, please play the audio from the 911 call in this case.
Jackson County 911.
I keep hearing I saw somebody on my back porch, but I can't see them now. They're making a noise.
Are they trying to get into your house?
Yes, they're trying to get in the back door. Hurry, please.
Where are you at right now?
I'm in the kitchen, and I'm watching the door that they were trying to get in. Oh, they're breaking glass. Come on, please. Okay, come on up in here. I got something for you.
Ma'am, listen to me. Ma'am.
Please come on, hurry.
Ma'am, listen to me. Somebody else is dispatching officers to you. Okay? Somebody else already has them on the way.
Hello? You? Who are you?
Okay, ma'am, I don't want you to confront them because you don't know who they are.
You hear them? You hear them? Yes, they're upstairs doing something. Come on, please.
Do you have any weapons with you?
Yeah, I got my gun in my hand. I fired it one time, but I don't know if I got enough grip to put it to tell them.
Do you know how many there are?
See, they throw stuff downstairs. I'm waiting on you when you come down the stairs and they blow your brains out. I'm waiting for you. You don't blow your brains out when you come downstairs. Come on. Tell the sheriff to come on. They too slow.
So they're coming. When he gets there, I do not want that gun in your hand when he gets there.
I'm waiting on you. Come on. Come on. Come on down here, you scared.
Ma'am, are you shooting at him again?
Yes, ma'am. He run back upstairs and come at you. Come on. That's what I want you to do. Come on. Here's the officer all in his office. I'm going to lay the gun right up here. That's what kept me safe. Thank you.
Now, what you heard was a 79-year-old woman defending herself from a home invasion at 12 noon in Commerce, Georgia. You heard her, and you can hear the fear in her voice where, y'all come, police, y'all tell the sheriff to come now. They're breaking the glass. I'm in my kitchen, but I can hear them coming. You heard her say, you come on up them stairs, and I'm going to blow your brains out. Now, here's the question I have for all of these gun control nuts. Do you think gun control laws are going to keep thugs like this from trying to break in houses at 12 noon? I got another question for you. What would this 79-year-old woman what would she have done if she didn't have her own gun? That 911 call we had to slim it down, trim it down for the sake of airing on the radio. That 911 call lasted 9 minutes. 9 minutes. It took 9 minutes for the police to arrive when this 79-year-old woman has a burglar in her home. When the Jackson County Sheriff deputies arrived on scene, they arrested 20-year-old Hans Rogers. Hans had broken in this woman's house. Unfortunately for Hans, Grandma had that thing on her. See, unlike you, I care about women so much. When I say you, I'm talking about the gun control advocates, and the baby murder advocates. They say they care about women's rights. Certainly not the women before they're born. The young women before they're born. They certainly don't care about old women like this 79-year-old grandma, because these are the people who want to take her gun from her. Grandma said, come on up them stairs and I got something for you. Listen, deliverance from the Lord doesn't always come down with manna from heaven. Sometimes it comes in the form of giving you grace and ability to fight back.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.